What about the multiverse? This was raised earlier. We're talking about the multiverse. Since about the 1970s, when fine-tuning was discovered, the multiverse became all of a sudden, in the physics community, this became a very popular theory, that we are surrounded by a nearly infinite number, or perhaps infinite number of universes. I wonder why the rise of the multiverse theory would be coinciding with the rise of the discovery of fine-tuning. Here's why. Because if, let's say it's a 300 million to 1 shot that you're going to win the lottery, the Powerball, but you have 300 million tickets, surely one of those tickets is going to win. Yes? So if it's incommensurable odds that we're going to get a life-permitting universe, but we've got an infinite number of universes, we're definitely going to be seeing a life-permitting universe. It's just going to have to happen. Now, there's two different views of this. The minority view is held by Max Tegmark, T-E-G-Mark, M-A-R-K. He believes that these other universes are in different dimensions. It's really far out. It's very Doctor Strange kind of multiverse theory. That's the popular version. Hardly any physicists hold to that. Max Tegmark would be an exception. Most believe that the universe, our universe, came into being through the Big Bang, and there's some kind of a universe generator. It made our universe, and then it inflated off another universe, kaboom, another Big Bang, and then another one, kaboom, Big Bang. And these are all spatially isolated from one another. We could never be in contact with universe B, or universe C, or universe D, or all the other billions, trillions, or infinite other universes out there. So they're spatially separated from our universe, and we're one universe among many. Hence, not a universe, one verse, but a multiverse. That's the theory. With me? There is zero evidence for this view. Zero. Proponents of the view, like Martin Rees of Oxford, or rather Cambridge, he is a multiverse supporter, and he says this is no more than a theory. This is in his book, Just Six Numbers, which the subject of the book is how to explain the fine-tuning. And he says, how do I explain it? The multiverse. How much evidence is there for that? Dr. Rees, zero. It's just a theory. George Ellis, if you look up this article here, does the multiverse really exist? He is one of the top 5 cosmologists living on planet Earth today. And in this article in Scientific American, he gives a scathing review of the evidence for the multiverse. I mean, it is embarrassing. By the time you're done reading it, pick up that article. It's free online. George Ellis, does the multiverse really exist? In it, he says, there's no way in principle we could find evidence. Well, maybe in the future we'll find it. No, not even in principle can we discover these other spatially isolated universes. As we studied before, if there's an actual infinite number of universes, that leads to absurdities. Bertrand Russell gave the example of this character called Tristram Shandy. Tristram Shandy, he was writing his autobiography, but each day that he wrote his autobiography, it took him 2 days to record what happened on that day. So on Tuesday, that 24-hour period, he wouldn't finish writing about that day until the end of Wednesday. So he's always twice as much behind on the project of being able to catch up. But Russell points out, believing in actual infinities, he says, over an actual set, does he finish his autobiography? Yes. You say, how do you figure? It takes twice as long. Well, twice as long in an actual infinity versus regular as long in an actual infinity is still infinity. So you see the problem. That leads to an absurdity. What if you have a universe in which you have 100 billion stars? Let's just say 100 billion stars. And each star has 10 planets around it. And each planet has 2 moons. And you've got an infinite number of universes with 100 billion stars and 10 planets and 2 moons. What happens if you take away one of the moons from each of the stars, or each of the planets? How many moons do you have left? An infinite number of moons. What if you add a moon in an infinite set? How many do you have left? An infinite number. Or how many more do you have? An infinite set. Let's say the rotation of a moon going around Mercury versus going around Jupiter goes around 10 times as fast. I have no idea about this, by the way. I'm throwing it out as a thought experiment. The moon goes around 10 times as fast as Jupiter, but this has been happening for an infinite amount of time. Which has more revolutions, the moon on Mercury or the moon on Jupiter? They have an equal number. See, that's the problem. There's a universe in which we have the Lord of the Rings. I mean, I know this sounds cool, but it's just not true, right? So just keep it in the books, not in like reality. There's a universe in which we have Richard Dawkins being the Pope. We have a universe in which Billy Graham wrote The God Delusion. We have a universe for everything. And if we're saying it's an actual infinite set, that leads to absurdities in reality. This eliminates probability theory. If you're going to use the multiverse to explain this improbability of 10 to the 37th and 10 to the 120th and 10 to the 10 to the 123rd, you have to use it to explain all improbabilities for the rest of your life. Anytime something seems fishy to you and the odds don't go in your favor and you think someone's actually been cheating, you can't say that that was improbable because there's an infinite number of universes in which that could have happened. More on that later. This doesn't pass Occam's razor. William of Occam, I believe in the 11th century, had his view. Not the simplest explanation is right. It's that we shouldn't multiply causes beyond necessity. We shouldn't multiply causes beyond necessity. If one person was stabbed to death, if someone was stabbed to death with 54 stab wounds, we wouldn't say that 54 people stabbed the person once. We would say one person stabbed the person 54 times. Now, could it be 54 people? Yes, it could. Occam's razor just says, if we don't know better, either way, we shouldn't multiply causes beyond necessity. It seems that to replace one God, you need to have an infinite number of universes. This is breaking Occam's razor to the upteenth degree. We can no longer use Occam's razor if we believe in the multiverse. That is toast. We might as well just get rid of it and stop saying we believe in Occam's razor. All right. Then there's the inverse gambler's fallacy. Inverse gambler's fallacy. How does this work? Here's the gambler's fallacy. You walk up to a friend and he says, hey, I've been flipping this quarter 10 times, and each time it came up heads. He said, now, how much do you want to bet that it's going to come up tails this time? Let's see, 50% chance in the first flip, 50% times 50%, 25% chance for the second, 12.5%, 6.25%. You realize the odds of flipping a quarter 10 times and it coming up heads every time, that's very, very small. But we're not saying that he predicted that in advance. We're saying that he just so happened to flip a coin and it came up heads. Wow, flipped it again, came up heads, flipped it again. Now on the 11th time he says, what do you think the odds are it's going to come up tails this time? Because we had 10 heads in a row. What do you think the odds are if I flip this quarter, it's going to be heads or tails? You know what the odds are? 50-50. That's the gambler's fallacy. It's looking and seeing somebody throw, 2 sixes at the craps table, saying, oh, they keep throwing it. And this time, the odds are they can't throw a 1 in 36 chance over and over and over and over. No, it's still a 1 in 36 chance to throw 2 sixes at the craps table. So that's the gambler's fallacy. The inverse gambler's fallacy works like this. Philip Goff, who's a philosopher, gives this thought experiment. What's the thought experiment? He says, let's say you wake up in a hospital room, you have amnesia, you're looking around the hospital room, and you see that there is a chimpanzee typing the complete works of Shakespeare on a laptop. A Macintosh, no less, okay? And he's typing the complete works of Shakespeare. He says, what would you assume? What would you assume? One, you could say, well, okay, I've got to be dreaming. I don't remember getting here. I don't know if I was in a car accident. I can't remember anything. Maybe I'm still asleep. I'm unconscious. Maybe I'm undilated. Maybe I'm having some kind of a trip here. Maybe this is a trained monkey. Maybe they did that. This is some kind of a trick, a ruse. Maybe I'm on a Magic for Humans, and they're just trying to trick me, and I'm watching this monkey type this out. Or maybe there's some kind of a trick with the laptop or something. Maybe it's a robot. Maybe they created a robot. You would come up with any number of explanations, right? Would it make any sense to say there's probably lots of monkeys around here, mostly writing nonsense. Do you see the inverse fallacy? The fallacy is this. It's not enough to say, well, with enough chances and enough people and enough monkeys, they could write the complete works of Shakespeare. The question is, why is this monkey writing the complete works of Shakespeare? And that's Goff's point, is we're in the universe in which we find life-permitting constants and values. We can't just look out at the improbabilities of all the others, if they exist. We have to explain why it occurred here in the same way that we would have to say, why is there a monkey typing the complete works of Shakespeare? It's the inverse. I thought that was brilliant. Anyways.